Good evening. Thank you all very much for coming to the Boston Society of the New Jerusalem, known to some as the Church on the Hill, Swedenborgian. This church is 204 years old, and we have been on this site since 1842. No member of the staff has been here quite that long, but we've been here for a while, and we're glad that you are on this spot with us tonight. We're delighted to have with us Rabbi Elaine Zecher from Temple, Israel, in Boston, barely in Boston, but in Boston, and Christopher Lydon, veteran WBUR journalist, back again to host the conversation. Let me get out of the way. We'll give them about an hour, and then we'll get some questions for you. And we just want to say thank you for being here tonight. Take it away. It's your conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. You're one of the great impresarios of the town nowadays, Colin, and I'm thrilled to be part of this series, and especially to meet Elaine Zecher this evening. Elaine, you know that we've been doing this for a few months now, and this might be our 6th or 7th shot at it. The general rubric that Colin gave us from the beginning was faith and life in Boston in the 21st century. And we've had some wonderful, wonderful experiences in the, I guess all in Christian churches of different kinds so far. And I'm learning a whole lot about our town. You're something really new for me, having driven past that sort of monumental Temple Israel on the Riverway a million times, and regarded, I think I said to you, it's something like a Jewish cathedral in this town. But let's begin. We can begin anywhere and go anywhere, but let's begin with the thread through all of these conversations has been, for me, a time of declining numbers in a certain way in church life, and yet there's nothing's being atrophied or lost or forgotten. Terrific vitality, younger people raising fresh questions about the life in faith, and I'm dying to hear the Jewish experience of it. Give us a general sense of 2022 in the long history of Temple Israel?
Sure. I'm going to move up in my seat because I think that the chair was made for someone who is not me. So I sort of got lost in the chair. So I'm not falling off my chair if you see me sitting here. So I move forward because I think that action is an important action. And it is also to recognize that there are certain assumptions that we make about traditions, about people, about places. And so it strikes me as so intriguing that the gazillion times that you drive by Temple Israel, which is on the corner of Longwood Avenue and the Riverway, and has 4 columns that sit in the front that was built in 1927 as a meeting house. And I'll talk a little bit about that history and how we got there, because it wasn't our first home, to see it as a cathedral. So there's a reference to the way that Christians might think of big building must mean cathedral. And so for our synagogue, that place that you really see was a meeting house. It was never built as a sanctuary, as a matter of fact. It was built as a 1,000-seat gathering place. And
specifically Jewish and religious?
And specifically Jewish and specifically religious. And it's where Martin Luther King spoke when he came to Boston, in one of the many places. And it was really a gathering place. And so using life and faith together for Judaism, I would say that it is life and community. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that building was called a meeting house is the same name that was given to the tabernacle. It was a house of meeting. Mm-hmm. It was a house of meeting in terms of the divine, but it was also meeting the divine in one another. So when Temple Israel started in 1854 in Boston, in Roxbury, we had a number of different homes, and one of the places we were in was what we know is a Morse Auditorium, and the rabbi
on Commonwealth Avenue.
On Commonwealth Avenue,
okay.
And that I believe it's a big dome,
yeah.
Right? So the rabbi at the time, Rabbi Harry Levy, he felt that the synagogue needed to have more of a central place and to be seen more of a hub. And so he actually helped the synagogue find this place that was in the city, and yet the entrance was not looking at the city. The entrance was actually looking away from the city. As you drive by and you see those pillars, the original design of the synagogue actually had 18 pillars. As anybody who has done any construction knows, that you don't always end up with all your pillars or whatever you had planned. And so he wanted to build this meeting house and also an education center. And it wasn't, though, but the synagogue actually, the sanctuary actually stayed at Morse Auditorium until the 70s. And the actual sanctuary in Temple Israel is not necessarily seen because it's the shape of an L, and the sanctuary is in the middle of the L. So from the street, you don't even know that there is really a sanctuary there. So not a cathedral, but a place of gathering and a place of prayer, a place of discovery in lots of different ways. But that's also why we're here today, because once we get to know one another, we actually know what is actually going on inside.
It has the air of establishment about it.
And very a kind of formality to it, for sure.
Yeah, this is the place.
It's fair.
I was just going to say, though, that the thread of the conversations we've had with church people, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room tonight, is a kind of regeneration, finding new members, finding new meaning, finding people that had been left out or felt left out. I'm thinking of John Uni. I'm also thinking of Emmett Price. Sort of start something new. Place the life of Temple Israel on that thread.
Sure. I think that Temple Israel, though the building might give a certain impression, once through the doors, there's a sense of innovation and adaptation, and the beautiful way that that tradition and history interacts with what is new. And I said to you that in my office, I have a sign that says, "Trust your crazy ideas." And on the other side is a sign that says, "Make it happen." And so there's a joke that we often say that in the sanctuary, so many religious institutions might have words that are up on the wall that speak of religious truths, but really what they're thinking is, this is the way we've always done it. And we hold on to that because we feel secure. And I would say that what characterizes Temple Israel all the way through, and that's why I wanted to share about Harry Levy, because he said we have to be different. In 1927.
Different from whom?
We have to be different from the way that we were, but we also have to be able to recognize, because I'm part of Reform Judaism, and Judaism there's a spectrum of the way that someone is observant.
Remind us the short course: Reform
Yes.
Judaism, Conservative
Yes.
Judaism, Orthodox Judaism.
So there was this place called Mount Sinai, and there was a place where Moses went up, and he got the Torah, he got the commandments. A lot of it depends on where you sit on a long spectrum of what you think really happened on Mount Sinai. If you think God spoke to Moses and said, "Here is the law," you're going to be much more traditional. This is the law. Who are we to change it? If you see that something happened somewhere, some kind of religious truths that God handed down, you're going to see yourself much more on the progressive kind of way. So Reform Judaism is the name of a denomination, but I like to really think of us as, in Judaism, as really seeing us across a wide spectrum of thinking about how do we take what's in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and how do we understand what the teachings are and find truths, not necessarily facts, but truths. And the truths help us then live our lives. And when we think about how do we interact with the divine, and how does the divine move with us and through us, how do we work in community, how do we do what the prophets taught, which Reform Judaism is based very much on the way that the prophets taught about, you can't say you're going to be fasting and then walk over someone and not care about them. Isaiah said, "Is this the fast that I asked of you?" That's something that we read every Yom Kippur, because it's not just about being so myopic, so narrow-minded, and you have to do these rituals this exact way. But it really matters the way we take care of one another, the way the prophets taught us. So Reform Judaism was very much based on that. And Reform Judaism also has expanded much more, I think now, to think about, well, how does God, how does the divine play a role in our lives? How can we be informed? So once again, the idea of faith, to say, I believe in God, and that just is enough. And it's never enough. I don't think it's enough in Christianity either, because there are the works, there are the way that we act. It's something that I think we share. And so when I think about Temple Israel, 2022, and I think where we sit actually in a middle place in Boston, where the Jewish community is north, south, east, and west of us. And we are constantly thinking about, it's not just a membership organization. It is about the way that people become part of our orbit. And how do they become attracted? How do they associate with what we do? How are they invested and attached to the life of the community? So we think about it in terms of geographically, demographically, and affinity. So when you ask the question, how are we, I'm going to use this term as a small r, how are we all part of a kind of resurrection of a religiosity, a spirituality that we can all be a part of, and stop saying people aren't joining, people don't want to be part of it, people don't want to have anything to do with religious life. I disagree. Of course there are, and certainly media love to play up on people who push up against and create controversy and aren't sure. But let's think about, even for all of us who are sitting in the sanctuary or here listening or watching us, and think about what gives your life meaning. And the kind of meaning that we know brings us is something that has a connection to the past, a document that we call the Torah, the prophets, the Bible, that speaks from ancient language that sweeps us up to give meaning and purpose in our lives today. And I know that there are many passions that people have, and we talked about, people think, music is my religion, sports is my religion. I like to say that Temple Israel is one of the three religious institutions in the Longwood area. There's Temple Israel of Boston, there's Fenway Park, and there's Harvard Medical School, and that literally forms a triangle. Yeah. And all the three places have a kind of passion associated to it. And so I think where we have gotten into trouble is, meaning religious institutions, is to say, this is the only way. And when we say this is the only way, it's what makes people feel like I'm not included, or you're not speaking to me. But when we're saying, wherever you are, however you are, come in, be part of this community, be part, I like to say that it's not a life sentence. Religion is not a life sentence, meaning I get involved and then I'm never going to get out of it. We know that there are many people who have had taken different paths, who have tried different traditions, who have tried different ways of expressing their religious truths. And in that way, they have, in finding meaning and purpose, nurtured their inner lives. So let's go back to Torah. So what happened in the very beginning? How did the human being come into existence? It was the breath of the divine that breathed life into the human being. In Judaism, in Hebrew, the same word for breath is soul. And so how is it that we are nurturing our inner lives? How is it that when we know how to exercise, and you can see a lot of YouTube videos about exercising, and when we reach out, and we reach up, and we reach down, but then when you want to reach in, physically, there are a lot of things in the way. And metaphorically, there are a lot of things that get in the way, not just our bones and all those things that Harvard Medical School teaches. And so I believe that our religious traditions, I believe that Judaism has a path that helps us get inside.
I want to just go back a few minutes. You said something about Orthodoxy and the Reformed tradition. It rhymed in my head with what I feel about the evangelical Christian and the Pentecostal Christian. The evangelical Christian, the premise is that it's all in the book, and he gave us that. The Pentecostal tradition is also that God speaks to us every day directly, and we could almost do it not necessarily without the book, but it's a lived experience. I'd like you to go back to the basic premises of faith and what we believe. And Christians, a lot of them call themselves believers. And some people also call themselves God-fearing, as if to say, we know that's out there. A lot of Jews call themselves observant, or not particularly observant. But what is the, not dogmatic, but the sort of leap of faith? What is the spiritual language experience that is central for you and your congregation?
Yeah. I think that when we speak of either or, as you gave somewhat of a dichotomy, and where is it in Christianity where those two ideas actually they merge, and how is it possible that you can live a certain life in a particular way based on text, and what Judaism calls it is halakha, which means walking on the path, on the way. Is it the way? Is it a way? And so if it's just based singularly on text, I think that for Jews, the Judaism that we observe is not specifically only Torah. It is a layered Judaism, because what came after Torah was Mishnah, and in many ways what Mishnah was asking was, which means to repeat actually, and I think you could say that probably the Christian version might be the Gospels of what comes after the Word, right? And so what those rabbis were trying to say, well, what does God want from us when God gives us this instruction? Don't boil a calf in its mother's milk. Is it just if there's a calf, don't take the milk from that cow and boil it? Or is there something more? And so that was what the rabbis, they started to, we call them the rabbis, not me kind of rabbis, but rabbis from a long, long time ago. And this would be if we were taking history as the dates, it was sort of 100 to 100, and then it was written down by the year 200 of the Common Era. And so there were these discussions and these questions. And then a next generation came along and said, what did it mean in the Mishnah when it said in the Torah? And that's called the Gemara. And the Mishnah and the Gemara together make the Talmud. And the Talmud is a very large, when people quote the Talmud, it's a huge document. And what it was rabbis arguing with each other. And the majority and the minority opinion got in the text, along with a lot of storytelling and a lot of considering what could be possible. And then there's another, and then another. And so if we were to look at it as a documentary tell, like in archaeology, when you do a slice this way and you see the various levels, you can see something that's incredibly dynamic. And that's part of the faith of Judaism, is the belief that in addition to all these texts, there was something called midrash, which was to answer questions that the text did not answer. So, for example, Abraham was told, Lech lecha, go for yourself, go, leave here and go to this place where I'm going to show you. And it's not Mesopotamia. It's actually away from civilization. Go on this journey. Go to some place where you don't know and discover it and think of and see what's going to happen there. And so the Midrash, I like to say, they were the first Imagineers, not Walt Disney. They were the first Imagineers, that they could see what was in the white space, not the dark, not the black letters. And they said it was because Abraham's father was sold idols, and Abraham was supposed to take care of the idols. And he was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we worshiping the idols? So his father came and he broke the idols, and his father came home and he said, Abraham, what happened? I put you in charge. And Abraham said, well, the idols got into a fight, and that's the way that they all broke. And his father said, Abraham, these are just stone. How could they do that? And Abraham said to his father, then why would you worship this? And that's what made God take notice of him. Now, is that in the Torah? No. But what I think is so beautiful about Judaism is the creative dynamic level, from the most traditional to, or the most, what we might say, doing more to the letter of observance than to even to something of Reform Judaism that may not abide in the same kind of way. But the mentality of the dynamic nature of thinking about how has our relationship with God changed, and all the different ways that we could experience God. So there are many who have portrayed God, in a very male model, right? White hair, not so bad, not anything wrong with that, but in the kind of hierarchical looking over us, but not to be able to be seen. When and that's something that Orthodoxy and Reform Judaism actually share. And when we think about when Moses is standing there after going up, getting the commandments, coming down, seeing, worshiping the calf, breaks the tablets, and before Moses goes up, he says to God, "Please let me see your face." And God says, "You can't see my face," in essence, because I don't have a face. But we use language that gives God, that embodies God. And we can see where other religions can take that in a very important way. But the idea is not that God is gendered even. And I think that's also important. One time we had a study group with women from another church, women from Temple Israel and women from another church. And the women from the church kept talking about God as He. And we do a lot of hard work with our congregation not to speak about God as He, because that puts a particular way of seeing God. And there's lots of different ways. Martin Buber speaks about God in the relationship. Abraham Joshua Heschel speaks about God in awe and wonder. And there's many, many other ways that God is manifest through all the different texts. But someone was saying He, because there's so much reference and certainly with the role of Jesus in speaking about Christianity. And so one of our group members said, "Why do you keep calling God He?" Because in her mind, she couldn't imagine that. And for all the Christians there, it was very clear. So a long answer to a question that can't necessarily be answered in a short way, because there isn't something that I can say is so definitive that is this way or that. And that's the exploration of Judaism. And I'll just end this part by saying that one of the most important symbols of Judaism is the question mark. That the question, asking the questions, not being afraid to ask the questions, is what actually, I think, what allows us to get through here, into our heart, into our mind.
I am fascinated by the vitality of the conversation that's clearly in your head all the time. But I'm also wondering a couple things. I want to know how you came to that experience as a girl growing up. I'm also got to ask, how does one become the senior rabbi at Temple Israel in Boston? But then I want to get on to questions of what it's like to be Jewish in Boston, which is not entirely religious all the time.
Right.
Jews play every kind of role in this world, very distinctively. But start with your own discovery of the importance, the interest, the challenge, the creative challenge of these questions for you, religious questions, which so many people we know don't buy into anymore.
Right. Or aren't willing, or haven't had a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
Haven't been in the situation that has allowed them to be able to do that. So I grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. It was primarily evangelical Christians. There were, from the Parkway to my house, there must have been 10 churches. On the Parkway, there was a huge sign that said, "Jesus is coming soon." And I could never figure out in my years what soon meant, because waiting. And so it was very much part of, all my closest friends were born again Christians. And I knew that I had to assert my own Judaism. And so my parents were very active in our synagogue. My mom sang in the choir. My dad stood in the back and pretended to usher, but really he talked. And so it was just part of our life. We did everything that had to do with the synagogue, even as I went to public school, and was always explaining Judaism, and always, in the choir, songs that were not just around Christmas time, but songs that were religious Christian songs in the public schools. And so I learned at a very early age that I had to assert myself as a Jew, or I would be swallowed. Literally, I really felt that, swallowed up. And there was also a value judgment of being Jewish and in comparison to being saved and to finding Jesus as truly a savior. So I was very active in youth group, and I thought, wow, when I go to college, I wanted to go to a place where there were a lot more Jews. So I chose to go to Brandeis. And I discovered something that I really wasn't prepared for, which is that it turns out when you're in a community where there's a lot of you don't really need to assert yourself so much. And I met a lot of Jews who were matter of fact about their Judaism. And so that was something that really made me think about what makes someone care about being Jewish. And it wasn't about faith. It wasn't about believing in God. And frankly, I don't think I had many conversations about God when I was growing up. It was about being part of a community. It was about being part of a people. It was about a history. I grew up in an era when the World War II was not so much of a distant past. And so that sense of how do we make sure that Judaism continues? But I always found in my house, besides my parents saying, you have to, continuing Judaism is up to you, like personally. I felt like it was on my shoulders that I needed to make sure that Judaism continued. And so I really took that. But I took it as not in a negative way, but in a way of how do you create an environment where Judaism is a positive experience? I like to think of Judaism as an enthusiasm, Judaism of enthusiasm. And so that it isn't they're out to get us, or that people aren't coming and therefore we're going to disappear. And I do want to just share one piece, because I was thinking about this as we were talking about, worrying about what about that younger generation? How come they don't get it, that religion is so important? And in 1964, Look magazine, and if you know what Look magazine is, then you're dating yourself, did a whole spread. The cover was The Vanishing American Jew, and predicted the end of Judaism, somewhat from intermarriage, but also from in the community of just assimilating. And 7 years later, Look went out of business. And here we are, all these years later, and from that moment to now, the Jewish community has increased by 30%. That really corresponds with, I think, the American increase in our demographics.
The ethnic population or the church population?
The Jewish population has increased 30% since 1964, but the whole American population, just the population, has increased by 30%. But it has not gone down. And that is important of being a minority, is that it has not lessened. And I would say there are certain indications of vitality that we have to put our finger on and recognize it. There are many people who, in the Pew study, when the religious study that came out, that more people were connecting themselves with Judaism and associating themselves. Now, it didn't mean that they were active members of their local synagogue. Those demographics, some of those are true, but some of them, I think, we get caught in negative data. And I think there are other signs. I I mean, one sign I will say, and I don't know if this is good or bad in a church, but in our congregation, we have 4 rabbis, and all of us work with conversion students. And we have right now about 45 conversion students, which is a lot.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
Who's converting to Judaism today in Boston? I mean, what do
Yeah.
they look like?
What do they
Male,
look like?
female, young, old?
Young, definitely young,
Wow.
definitely young. And I will also say there are also what I call sort of reaffirmations of people's Judaism. So they have a grandparent who was Jewish, and then their parents didn't raise them as Jewish. And so they are rediscovering their Judaism. But I have also brought people and affirmed people whose family can date back to the Spanish Inquisition, or even in the Azores, the way that there was, forced conversion. So even in my lifetime, to meet people whose families date back to Spain or the Azores, and that they are reclaiming it. So I think that there are also people who are reclaiming their Judaism that may have been given up by their own relatives.
Can I ask, how many of your congregants had that kind of inquiry, enthusiasm, discovery that you're expressing?
Yeah.
And how many of them are there because it's traditional, because they have friends there, they enjoy something about that community? I mean,
Well, so the question is, what's the definition of enthusiasm?
you're
Right.
the definition. You are the definition of enthusiasm.
We were talking today in a group. Burns was there as well, and someone was saying, the hero pastor, which is the person who leads the congregation is going to take us out of the morass that we are in and create enthusiasm and revive us and bring us to a place. And it's a very dangerous job. It's a very dangerous job, because if there's only one person who's enthusiastic, then we're in trouble. And so I think that there are different indicators of what enthusiasm means. The amount of people who engage in study is growing, is blossoming in our congregation. And
Studying the Talmud and
studying Talmud. We have a weekly Talmud study online. One of our rabbis, Rabbi Susie Jacobson, she has a weekly Talmud study that's 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're moving through. And there are other ways.
You have to be a member of the temple to get in on it. I'd love to sample it.
You should. Well, I'll give you the link.
Okay.
And there are lots of different classes. And we'll come to COVID and what COVID did, I think, in really positive ways. There's nothing positive about COVID, but what COVID caused us to do, I think, was very positive. So that all leads me to, I came to being a rabbi thinking, I never wanted to go into a congregation. They are boring, they are dying, they refuse to change. And so when I came out of rabbinic school,
Where would a rabbi go other than into a congregation?
yeah, I wanted to go into into a different kind. I thought I ended up in a Jewish community center in the South area, and I came to realize that was worse. And so Temple Israel opened up. I was in my 20s, and Temple Israel opened up, and I thought, this is a large institution, but it's a large organization. And I realized I could be the change I wanted to see. Wow. And I could be someone who could bring about change. So I came as an assistant rabbi. I was the first female rabbi of this congregation. I was the first rabbi to be pregnant. And that was a new experience for people to have a pregnant rabbi. And so all 3 of my kids, there they are sitting there, sometimes holding on to my prayer shawl when I'm leading services. And so I was at the synagogue for 26.2 years. And I say it like that. If you ever run a marathon, you'll know why I'm making that reference. Because you have to see the long game. You have to see the long, and I actually did run in a marathon. And so after 26.2 years, I applied to be senior rabbi. It was a very rigorous and in some ways traumatic experience because I knew the place. I loved the place. I had been instrumental in a lot of changes. And they did a national search. And that was, part of it was, this isn't armchair therapy, but, in part of that was hurtful because they knew me. Why would they look elsewhere? Like, why would they want to date somebody else? And yet, we go far to look for a treasure, and then you come back home and you realize the treasure has been here all along. And so I became the first female senior rabbi of the congregation, but I like to think of myself as just a senior rabbi of the congregation. And I have just loved being the senior rabbi. I've loved being the senior rabbi because there's a vision that I feel like it is homegrown, and it has come from really knowing every place, every nook and cranny, every transformation of the synagogue is something that I am familiar with and in some ways not afraid of. So that's how you become the senior rabbi of Temple Israel.
Does senior rabbi mean, does it mean you are the eldest or the longest standing, or does it have a particular?
Yeah, it means that I am in charge.
Ah.
That's what it means. It means that if we were to be hierarchical, I would be, I don't know, what would you call it in a church? Isn't the senior pastor, isn't that what you might call us, right? Call us senior pastor. Is to, I have a clergy staff. I think there are certain moments that you might be hierarchical, but it's a very different kind of way of working together.
So many questions. Who do you identify with outside Jewish church synagogues as in your position, either
in the business world? I would say the CEO.
No. But I'm thinking around here when we speak of faith and life in the 21st century around Boston. Do you see counterparts of yourself, people trying to do something like what you're doing in the Catholic Church, in Protestant churches, in new churches?
Well, I think that Nancy Taylor, Reverend, she was a
marvelous conversation.
Yes, and I have been part of a group.
That involved, I don't know how, signaling, inviting people who had felt excluded, whether it was gender issues or family issues or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And she seemed to have worked on it.
Yes.
And activities and associations.
Yes. And so with whom I identify is that there are I think with pastors and with the imam who are putting themselves out there, doing the hard work of trying to be creative, but also working together. And Burns and I have been in part of a group together for many years, and with other pastors, and talking together and sharing our challenges and sharing what has been, I think, sometimes hard and sometimes really wonderful when we've dealt with certain issues. Like when Pittsburgh happened 4 years ago, Temple Israel actually was a central place where the religious communities gather.
Remind us of that horror story, the worst.
Yes, it was a terrible horror story of a terrorist coming in and having particular images of Jews and working and immigrants and coming in on a Saturday morning and just killing people in cold blood. 11 people died, and just horrible. And I've driven by there when I go visit my mom, and it's not really opened anymore. I mean, it's the same way with Mother Emanuel. That church really hasn't really opened again, and so there were 1,800 people in our building. There were more online that night as a place. And you remind me that I want to say something about Temple Israel, which is the act of belonging is something that Temple Israel really has spent a lot of time thinking about and really caring about. And so an outreach particularly to LGBTQ who very much felt alienated by religious life. Younger people, creating not any kind of barriers to say, welcome, come in. Older people, to be able to say, here's a place where you can learn together. teens, that there are teens who belong to other synagogues, but maybe their teen program isn't so strong. So we're the largest Jewish teen program, liberal Jewish teen program that besides day schools at Temple Israel. The whole way that we educate and the way that our students come in learning in very different ways, of not necessarily sitting in classrooms, of moving about, of thinking about it. And I would say also with Temple Israel, the way that our prayer works and being willing to experiment, being willing to try new ways. We talk about, I think I said this to you last night, that you can say, to do liturgy right. This is the way you have to do it. But to have a liturgical experience is, how do you do it well? How do you
take that apart? I want to know much more about how you teach, practice, experiment, discover prayer life.
Yeah. So if we think about liturgy as drama, but in drama, there's often that fourth wall, right? And so often in liturgy, there is a fourth wall. And there's a lot of things going up on whatever is called, we call it a bema, a raised platform. And whatever you're doing, whatever the congregation's doing, that there's something separate. But powerful liturgical drama is taking down that fourth wall and allowing that use. Now, we have a prayer book. It's called a Siddur, and it means that it's ordered. It has a path that we take on to move in prayer. And there are 5 sections of the service, and I often show by our hand the way that there's an order to it, but what we bring to it. So there's something called keva, the structure of a service, but then there's something called kavanah, which is, what's the intention that we bring? What's the creative words that we use? So we might have a kind of thematic structure in the way that we work, but if you open your hand, if you see that as the prayer model, is how do we open ourselves up? And how do we allow the words of prayer, but also our experience? And for me personally, I have been involved in my role as a rabbi of being involved in creating the prayer books for weekday and also for the High Holy Days. And that for me, I will say, is one of my most proud of being part of that process.
Composing a prayer.
No, well, it's not really composing.
I don't mean writing, but assembling.
Yes, assembling and being part of a team that did that with there were editors and leading the editorial advisory group of what I did, and the way that you make prayer come alive. So if it's just having a book open and just looking at it and reading it, well, what is that experience? Maybe for people who just look at the word and say, this is what I'm using. But how do you use music? How do you move? How do you create a space where you may stand and sit and move in different ways? And certainly on our high holidays, we definitely use that much more. How do you turn to people next to you and maybe engage in some study? And not just because in Judaism, prayer and study are equated. That studying is really prayer. When you're studying, the presence of the divine is with you because you're interacting with one another. So I think that when our mission statement at Temple Israel is living Judaism together through discovery, dynamic spirituality, and righteous impact. And maybe I should have said this in the very beginning of what you were asking. So I'm coming back and hearing the question differently. So living Judaism together, living Judaism together through discovery, which is a kind of attitude, but also learning, dynamic spirituality. That it's not static, it's changing, it's using different words, that the same words, thouest, makest us, we don't use those words anymore. We don't use words of God as He, God only as Father, God only as King. that there are different ways. That's dynamic. Thinking about spirituality in lots of different ways. Maybe taking walks is an act of spirituality too.
Can I just say, in so many of these conversations, I am taken back to the 12th Baptist Church and
Yes.
Michael Haynes' leadership. He would often say, not every week, but 2 or 3 weeks, he would say, turn to someone next to you, not your wife, not the person you came with,
Yes.
and ask what you can pray for in their life. It was immensely instructive about, about our connections,
Yeah.
about finding language, learning something new, finding what actually people were troubled about. The first woman I ever prayed with in that way, you always take hands too, which is helpful, but she was from Barbados, and she was separated from her family for all sorts of economic reasons, but she was troubled about it, and we prayed about it, but it was really something new for me.
Yeah.
And it was
Very
not
intimate.
very incredibly
Touching.
intimate.
You can't even do that anymore. You're not allowed to touch. You have to ask permission, right? You can't
Yeah,
touch,
I
right?
know, but this was like an embrace, but
Yeah,
it
it
was
was.
a spiritual embrace, and it was, I mean, it happened hundreds of times, and always with a powerful effect. But obviously,
Yeah.
these are tricks of the trade in some sense. But,
Right,
but
but Martin Buber says, that we meet the divine in meeting.
thank you.
That is what
Thank
that's what
you.
he was
Oh,
doing.
my
That's what he
Lord.
was doing. That the encounter with another person
Yeah.
makes such a difference to be able to do that. I say the same thing. Turn to someone that you didn't know or you didn't come with, and with a pleasant countenance, then ask. That's
And then they ask you, and you
Yeah.
discover something about yourself in your answer.
right.
No, it's
Though interestingly, we would not necessarily say, "What can I pray for you?" Because it might be.
what can I pray for in
Yeah.
your life?
It's a beautiful image to be able to use prayer to be the connective tissue, the pulse that is moving between the two of you. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think that's what actually energized you, right? That's what gave you that religious fervor and energy in all those experiences to be able to do that. And I think that living Judaism together through discovery, dynamic spirituality, and righteous impact, then is how do we then take that encounter and go out into the world and make that righteous impact of making the world right and doing the kind of righteous work in helping to repair the world and helping to make the world better.
I want to ask you a question, and I want to ask others in, but simple question. What is it like to be Jewish in Boston, but even your kind of Jewish in Boston? Almost, a really impassioned Jewish consciousness in this time, in this rather strangely wonderful place.
Yeah, I think that there is, to be Jewish in Boston is to build relationships beyond the Jewish community. And how important, that's one facet. I think that there's so much, let me just speak about what, within the Jewish community, I think there's so much creativity and so much energy and a lot of possibility of being creative and bringing people in. So families with young children, and that's why when I said about demographically, geographically, and affinity, what brings people together, I think is a very exciting time. But I also think, and here's part of what I think, I do hope that whoever is listening, here's the importance of being in relationship with the Jewish community, of Jews not saying, well, I have this one friend or that one friend who's whatever, but really being able to be in relationship so that when things are not good, that it's possible to say, we need to stand together. We need to recognize. And I think so often throughout history, we have seen that when there has been anti-Semitism, it's an expectation that it's a Jewish problem. And in the same way that I would say racism for the African American community, for the black community, for the brown community, for the Asian community, is not their problem. It's our problem. Hate is our problem. And so I would ask us to keep asking our questions. How are we teaching ourselves to take care of one another? So, and it happens all the time, and I am a firm believer in anti-Semitism is a form of hate. So if you don't believe in hate, you can't believe in anti-Semitism. And there's a lot of hate out there. There is so much hate. And so Judaism believes that at any given time there are 36 righteous people, and in the Talmud it says this, there are 36 righteous people. Some say 18,000 people are out there. I like that number better, who aren't Jewish, who are doing the work of saying, we have to make sure that we're protecting. I'll tell you this story. In Israel, at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, the first thing you see when you walk in is the avenue of the righteous Gentiles. Why is that there and not the millions and millions of people who died? Because in the face of evil, the universal reaction of love and responding. Did they respond because they were Jewish, that they saved Jews? That's why they're there? Or did they respond because the right thing to do is when someone is being murdered, mistreated, taken all their belongings away? What do we do? And I would say, and I do want to say this, that in 2020, when everything was happening, particularly in the black community, and a lot of people were saying, the black community has to lead us. I felt differently. I felt that the Jewish community had to be strong leaders in saying, we will not abide by the kind of racial violence, the people dying for no reason but the color of their skin. And I went to our board, and I asked our board, a lot of people were writing statements, right? A lot of major organizations were writing. And I asked our board to write a statement, to make a statement about where we stood with regard to inequity, into racial injustice. And they did. I didn't. They did. And out of that statement came the recognition of the expansion in terms of ability, LGBTQ, and to really explore what does it mean to feel like you belong, and what does it mean when people are going to say that they're going to take care of other people and take responsibility for ill treatment and not say that's your problem. Like, why is anti-Semitism in Jewish studies departments? Why is that? And racial inequality in black study departments. And we developed a whole document and a whole action plan of more than 100 different actions that we had to face even in our own community, in terms of people of color in our own community, who were experiencing certain kinds of prejudice and being willing to tell the truth. So the question that you ask about, what does it mean to be Jewish in the greater Boston area? I think we have to ask, what does it mean to be part of the universal community of faith, of religious institutions in the greater Boston area? And how, when we sign documents or when we say this, that we have to stand up, what are the very specific actions we are willing to do to really help one another? And I do think, and I will say this here, that I think that in Boston and particularly with regard to racial justice, there is so much work that we in the religious community need to be doing, whether it has to do with incarceration, whether it has to do with economic justice. Shagun Irua came to our congregation a number of years ago, and he challenged our congregation to be part of economic justice. And what does it mean to keep buying from your own community? And that really set Temple Israel on an amazing path of thinking about where are the restaurants we go to? Where are the businesses we buy things from? Where do we, when we do a lot of food, there's a lot of food in religious life, you know, where we get food, where are we buying this from? And so, particularly with Black-owned businesses, Temple Israel has really worked hard to engage in a really important relationship of really helping to change the economic largesse that is in, and seeing there are some, we know there are businesses where the owners, their lives were changed, not because of rescuing or hero work, but just because the relationship exists. And that's relationship is where God exists.
Amen.
And
Wow, that's
between
very
us
powerful.
and in communities and in all the different ways. So when you said you want to make sure, like, what is it that I really believe to get across? I think it is that Judaism of enthusiasm, that there's so many possibilities, that the way that we open our arms and say, if you have felt lonely, if you have felt excluded because the way that society has pushed you aside, that there is a place, a welcoming place. Not to say actually even welcoming is like we welcome you means like I've opened the door to let you in. It's a hard word. I believe that the word is belonging. Belonging means you belong here. This is your home too. And that third is that the idea that to be a member of the community here means that when anyone is calling for help, we are standing there together with them.
Thank you. That's an incredibly high standard and a high calling, and it's important. It's important to hear it.
You want to take some questions?
I'd love to.
Okay. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind that Elaine Zecher is a powerful worship leader? Does anybody not know that at this moment? That she is a great teacher? And no surprise, her temple, the largest of its kind in New England. I'm surprised it's not the largest in the United States, but it may be. She hasn't said. Thank you so much. You brought your enthusiasm. Fantastic to have you here. You know, some people think that Vern Stanfield is a plant because he's here every time and he always asks one of the first questions.
No.
And the truth is that Vern Stanfield is a plant. And I'm going to give him this first question.
He's the best plant ever.
But I did not come with a planted question. I do have something I want to ask you about, and I hope it's not too much of a damper on the enthusiasm. As you can tell, I get to work with Elaine, and I have great respect for her interfaith work and for the interfaith presence and witness of Temple Israel in general. It is my Jewish home away from home.
It
you
is,
know?
it's true.
But I know over many years, in doing that really important interfaith work, a challenge for our communities are the political questions around Israel and Palestine. And I mean, sometimes my denomination will make a statement, and the way I hear about it is a Jewish leader will share with me, and I'll be engaged in a conversation, which I really, value, although it also makes me a little nervous as I step into it. So my question is, with that, what do you see moving forward? I'm not looking back. In terms of not what's going to go on in Israel, but just sort of in general, that issue and what it means for our interfaith work together here in the States.
Yeah.
And particularly on the progressive end.
Yes, for
'cause,
sure.
I mean, your community is such a leader on so many progressive issues, and you're with other progressives, and this becomes a tight issue. So, anything you want to share about that dynamic?
I'm
But what is the question, Burns? Is it is it how do Palestinians become the object of the challenge of embracing, of welcoming, of recognizing?
Well, I'm going to say it. I'm going to try to say the question that I think very often comes up, and that is that there's a number of different levels of, first of all, Israel equals Jews, right? This is the complexity of it. Israel automatically equals all Jews. Israel, the political, the people who are the political leaders of Israel, representing all of Israel. And what I would say is the very sad and difficult circumstance that the Palestinians have been put in, not just by Israel, but I think by some of their compatriots. Let's just remember in 1947, in the partition plan, partition plan, was that it was separated. There was a Jewish state that looked something like an amoeba, and then there was this it was at the time an Arab state, you know, that would house people who had lived there, and it was rejected. And why it was rejected was that because the people who were not in the Jewish part wanted all of the land and went to war. So then what happened was that in fighting back, Israel had its territory, and then there were all these people who were homeless, who were thrust into situations where they were thrown out of their homes in lands that they thought was theirs. And then in 1967, even more of that land that Israel was in defending itself as a state then moved in, but didn't annex, but didn't really deal with the population that's there. And so the question is, if we don't believe in the oppression of people, why would we support a group of people who oppress a group of people like the Palestinians? And when we ask that kind of question in that way, and I'm not saying that you were necessarily asking in that way, but I think it is woven in for a lot of people, that it becomes very focused, that there is no question that people are asking the many other countries that exist in the world, including our own country, that has moved in and taken over territory of people, have oppressed them and continue to oppress them, but are not condemned on the same level as Israel is condemned. So when I look at Israel, I look at the government of Israel, and there's a lot that I don't like about what the Israeli government is doing. Do I believe that Israel has a right to exist? Absolutely. Do I believe that there is so much amazing work that is going on in Israel that people do not know about between Israelis, Arab Israelis, and Jewish Israelis, and Palestinians, of helping one another in profound ways? For sure. And so that's where that line between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism get conflated. And it becomes a very easy way to make it so that what's going on in Israel is because Jews are bad. And I don't think that's true. I know you're not asking that. But I know that that is in the liberal, in a lot of progressive communities, that is become this focal point. And there are a lot of Jews and a lot of Israelis who believe in a Palestinian state. There are a lot of Jews and a lot of Israelis who are not happy with what's going on in Israel, but also not happy with what's going on in our own country in terms of oppression and what's going on. And so when we become so focused that it's Israel, that it's so focused that Israel is oppression, and on college campuses that students are made to choose, you can either support Israel or support the idea that Israel is an oppressive country, then you can come be part of this organization that might not have anything to do with either of them. And I want to be really clear. What's going on in college campuses for a lot of Jewish students is awful, because they become the representative of all of the Jewish people. And there is no nuance. It is making a choice. Either you're with us against oppression, and that means that you are against Israel. And that is happening on college campuses in so many places. On Boston college campuses for sure, and they're having a very difficult time. So this is where other people, those 36 righteous or the 18,000 righteous, have to stand up and say, this is wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. You
Yeah,
asked
thank you.
the question and you answered it. That's pretty good teaching, wouldn't you say?
Hello. I don't know. Should I stand? Or
You
should I
can.
sit?
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Elaine Zecher, and I was a member of Temple Israel some time ago when I arrived to Boston, and it was exactly the triangle. I was living in Fenway. I was working at Harvard Medical School.
There you go.
And I just arrived from Israel, and I was missing Hebrew language. So I joined Temple Israel.
Keep your microphone here so people can hear you.
I grew up in Soviet Union. Religion was forbidden.
Yes.
When I was living in Israel, me and my ex-husband, who's also a Russian Jewish guy, we are celebrating Jewish holidays because it was national holidays of Israel, not because we were religious.
Yeah.
But when we arrived to Boston, we were missing Hebrew language, we were missing holidays, so it was really, really nice to be a part of Temple Israel and celebrate Jewish holidays, and it was really, really great. And my question is, because I'm not, then I moved with my other life, and I kind of stopped going to Temple
Not a
Israel.
life sentence, right? It's not, but you can always come back.
Well, yeah, let's not talk about that. But the thing is that it was nice for me to study, to learn about religion, to study religion, but I still missing the point. I have two questions. So my first question would be, what the difference between Reform Judaism and I would say Orthodox Judaism, except that, when I'm going to Chabad meetings, I know that I need to dress up like a long skirt, and when I go to Reforms, I know that I can dress up with miniskirt. So what would be the religious difference? And the second question is about the hate. So I'm the last person who would say, several years ago, who would say, oh, there is a problem of anti-Semitism, or there is a problem of hate, and whatever I went through for several years, I was thinking about it, and the irrationality that in reaction of people to me, and I can't explain this. It was very irrational to react this way or that way or that way. It's a feeling, and what feeling could be that did whatever it did? I can explain it only by hate. And the question is, you mentioned that Temple Israel is a community, right? It's not only people come for religious reasons. It's also like many things. As far as I remember, it was many things that people were meeting. I don't remember people. I remember I joined a study Torah. And
Torah study. So what's the question? I'm
a
trying.
short question.
A short question. Is Temple Israel answer? can bring people together, brings people together as a community against hate or against anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Is it okay that I wasn't a member for some time and and I can come and find a way to join a feed and find people who can help me to deal with the hate and with the anti-Semitism?
Yeah. So you asked you asked two questions: the difference between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism, and I'm wondering that you've been involved in Chabad. Is that what you're saying? Yes or no? Yes. Yes. Yeah, which is really interesting because and it answers in both questions to a certain extent. So there's something. Sometimes when people think of Jews, like sometimes people say to me, "Wow, you don't look like a rabbi." Now, why are they saying that? Because they're thinking of a man in a beard with black hat, right? And, like pictures of the Jews at the Western Wall, like that's authentic, right? My response, you know what my response is? This is what a rabbi looks like. I cannot account for every rabbi. But the reason why I say that is because a lot of people think what authentic Judaism is are those guys dressed in that way. And that they're very interested in bringing as many people in. And they work very, very hard. They raise a lot of money, and their ability to be attractive and come as you are, do whatever you want, but you can be part of it, and they feel like that they're making you be part of the community. And I think that they do good work, and they're very different from Temple Israel. Because Temple Israel believes that men and women are equal, and that men and women have that any gender, all genders, have access to Torah and all the different ways that we learn. So I would say that when you look at something that's orthodox, just look at the word orthodox. Orthodox is, this is the way it is. When you look at something that's liberal or progressive, you're going to see a much wider swath of the way that you can respond. So when you ask about, what draws you in, and I said, it's not a life sentence, right? You came, you left, that's wonderful. And you grew up in a world where anti-Semitism was state-run. It was state-organized in the former Soviet Union. And it is now, again, and in Russia. And so there's so much that's imprinted in you about what Judaism is and what it isn't, and where you are finding the way to find community is being an active member of any community, and I would say this to anybody who joins any religious community. If there's an expectation that things are delivered into your lap, I think one time there was a great video, it was called The Me Church, and it was a spoof on people like, don't worry, we'll come to you. And then they were in someone's backyard in their pool, right? Like, it's okay, you keep swimming, but we're going to do the service and, keep moving. And it could be the Me Synagogue, too. And so nothing is just dropped into our laps. And I believe that faith is not dropped into our laps either. It takes an act of us to meet where God is meeting us. Now, and there's a lot of different language in Christianity that I would say that's different from Judaism for sure. But to be part of a community is to say, I'm interested in this community, and I really care about anti-Semitism. And I want to meet other people who are connected to anti-Semitism, if that's what you're saying. That's possible. I think it's possible in any synagogue that you go to. You should ask in Chabad, what are they doing about anti-Semitism? Seeing if there are people there, if that's where you now find what is authentic. Because it's asking those questions is where we start to make those connections. And I think that's what is important for wherever you end up, is asking those questions and figuring out how you find other people.
Last chance, folks, for a question. Okay.
Yeah, right. Thank you for the talk. One thing that you mentioned that really touched me was how things have to change. So many people fight change so much. But I was just sitting here reading John 16:12 through 14, where Jesus said, the things that I have told you is not all that you need to know, but I can't tell you anymore now because you can't handle it. And so I think being led by the Spirit and realizing that things have to change can open a lot of doors.
Yeah. If you think about the life of Jesus, think about how Jesus was an Imagineer as well, and how he was willing to innovate. And that, as we know, can be very dangerous. And so there is a model in everyone's tradition, I think, in some way. Yeah.
As we conclude, and I'm not seeing any other hands, not even Kevin Baxter's, is there, as we think about living Judaism at Temple Israel, is there any doubt in anybody's mind that there's a great deal of enthusiasm at Temple? And
Yeah. Friday night at 6 o'clock. You're always welcome.
and is there any doubt in anybody's mind that Rabbi Elaine Zecher is in charge? I think she's certainly been in charge tonight, hasn't she, Chris? It's great to have you here. We do have some refreshments. You're going to want to be at WBUR 90.9 at 9 o'clock for Christopher Lydon's Open Source on Ukraine. And it's a two-sided conversation, so bring your, ask the questions, right? You got the questions on that show tonight at 90.9. Thank you so much for coming.
And it has been a true honor. It has been a true honor to
How
sit with this man.
about a round of applause, folks? Thank you very much for coming. Hey, I see you all back here November 21st for Bill McGibbon. Don't miss that one. God bless you and keep you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Wow.